The French Revolution, unlike the Chinese, Russian, or any other revolution, this one would change not only the countries itself or, the usual stuff, but also society and the world people had lived in for hundreds of years. It shifted France and most of Europe from monarchist, feudal, and authoritarian regimes to republican, capitalist, and liberal systems. This revolution is a lot more revolutionary than you might think. The French Revolution. What an amazing event, really. The amount of change is just, it's amazing, really. It changed everything. Anyway, so start learning a little bit of what happened and what it led to. So France, and well, most of Europe and the world in 1789 was dominated by kings and the church. The kings of Europe were thought to be the most important people ever. The king of France was thought to be elected by God, and his family had to rule France, like he had to. This idea is called absolutism, and it wasn't only in Europe, it was in China and all over Asia and Africa. And all monarchies in the world had it. But absolutely, the King of France was the biggest absolutist there was. The extreme absolutism began with Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIV, think of all the brats you can possibly think of. Now, multiply it by 1,000. He spent all of his country's money on building palaces and all sorts of things for himself. And he also spent a lot of money on his clothes and on wars. And well, the tradition soon passed to his son and then to his grandson, Louis XVI. And well, Louis XVI was the King of France in 1789. France was also the most powerful nation in Europe and the most populated as well. There were just some terrible problems. The nation had been in a lot of huge wars, like the 7 Years' Wars, and been in so many conflicts that the money had disappeared. There had also been a huge famine, so people were starving, and the king had a lot of money and food, and he didn't share it, so people were pretty sad, they didn't really like it. And the country also relied on poor classes to do all the hard work, while the clergy and the nobles got the money, and they didn't have to pay taxes. Like the poor people had to pay taxes, but the rich people didn't. So poor people got a bit mad. Anyway, the situation reached the breaking point in 1789 when the Kingdom of France was officially bankrupt. Right? It had no more money left. The king was forced to summon a congress called the Three Estates, which was represented by the poor, the nobles, and the clergy. Right? The king hadn't summoned this thing for 200 years, so as you can tell, it was pretty disorganized and it just didn't go well. Anyway, the estates, because there was a poor majority, voted for taxing the rich. Right? They said, "Alrighty, we're gonna tax these rich." The king and the rich said no, and they closed down the Congress of the Estates. The poor estate, which was made of workers, ran away to the tennis court. Basically, they found the tennis court, legit. They went to Paris, they found the tennis court, and they went there. There, they discussed the issues. And they decided France needed a constitution. They needed to limit the power of the king. They thought that was the best. And they signed the tennis court oath, which was basically a deal that they would all do something to give France a constitution. On the 11th of July, 1789, the fact that France had no money and the government was bankrupt was revealed to the people. Now, like any normal people would, they started to panic. Right? They were like, "God, the government has no money. We're all gonna die." And riots began in the streets, and people were scared because a lot of them didn't have any food. But most of the citizens in France didn't participate because they were scared of the army and the police, and they were scared that they might shoot them. But hey, in July 14th, the rebels stormed the Bastille, which was a royal French prison, and they destroyed the jailhouse. They let some prisoners out, and they destroyed it completely. Now, when the army heard of the news that they had destroyed the prison, instead of killing the rebels, they joined them. Now, because the army was also kind of tired of the king. So now that the army was with the rebels, a lot of people from the countryside, from the streets, from the outskirts, from the villages, they all joined one big mob of angry poor people, and they marched on Paris. Now, the king, he escaped to his palace in Versailles and put a lot of guards there. But who cares? The rebels seized Paris. They took control of Paris. And they said that they were on the tennis court's side. Remember the tennis court? Yeah, they were on their side. Now the tennis court members soon arrived, and they declared the National Assembly. Alrighty, they declared a big council. And from the 4th to the 11th of August, they officially banned feudalism, which was the economic system, a person being superior because of their birth. They abolished all of peasantry and slavery. All taxes collected by the church were now illegal. They also removed a lot of church power, and they took all the church privileges. They basically just killed the church. And on the 26th of August, the biggest reform was proclaimed, probably the biggest reform ever, called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was officially made. The Declaration was probably one of the first times in human history that said that all men, no matter what they were equal. Yeah, no matter the race or the class or whatever you were all equal. Now, this is pretty big. The nation, well, the National Assembly, also declared science and atheism to be the national religion, and they confiscated all of the church land and rights. They basically destroyed thousands of years of Europe. Pretty much. Anyway, that's a lot of process, but hey, it was a lot of process for the people too, you know. They were like, whoa. So the revolution started to become a lot more political. These few changes were probably the biggest changes in European society since the fall of the Roman Empire, but hey, you know, giving rights to all men was unthinkable, but they did it anyway. While all of this was happening in France, monarchists from France, you know, people that supported Louis XVI, you know, they ran away. They were scared. They went to Austria and to Prussia, to Germany, right? Now, they told Austria, hey, dude, they're killing all the kings and they're killing all the monarchists and they're doing crazy things. So the kings of Austria and Prussia, they were really, really angry. They were like, what the heck is happening in France? What the hell is going on? We gotta stop them. And they made huge armies to invade France. On October 1st, 1791, 2 years after the main revolution, the National Assembly finished the first constitution and declared a constitutional monarchy, with Louis XVI as the king and a brand new legislative assembly to rule as a Congress. So it's kind of like, think of like Britain, you know, Britain, they have like a king, well, nowadays a queen, and they got like the parliament and all. Well, think of that, but in France, just that the king had a little more power. Basically, the assembly, you know, started to form political parties. It was divided between two sides. The Girondins, which were constitutional monarchists, versus the Jacobins, who were republicans. The Girondins believed that the king could still play an important role, and they should be accepted in the constitutional monarchy. The Jacobins were extremely radical for their time. They wanted to kill the king, they wanted to declare a republic, and they wanted a government-controlled economy where the government controlled everything. Again, while all of this happened, Austria and Prussia were ready for battle, and they forced France to go to war on the 20th of April, 1791. So in the past, France had fought Prussia and Austria separately in many wars. In the 7 Years' War, France had fought Prussia, and, well, it had been very tough for them to fight them, and they ultimately lost. And France had fought Austria many, many times. It was their biggest rival. So the two of them combined, you would have been like, what? Everyone's like, no. France is going to lose this. There's no way. Like, both of the enemies that had been really close matches joined together would be very difficult for France to win and almost impossible. But hey, France did win. They won battle after battle for 8 years. But how? Well, an important thing to know is that the armies of Austria and Prussia were made up of nobles and people of higher classes. You know, you had these people of higher classes. It was a tradition, you know, it had always been the European tradition that the big wars had usually been fought by, you know, a few conscripts, but most of them were just, you know, wars were just decorative for the nobles and for the higher classes. So the armies of Austria and Prussia were actually not that big. They were just 100,000 men. around 100,000 men. It was actually not as big. The French army, on the other hand, was no longer an army of nobles, because this war was no longer a war for the king. It had been abolished. There was no more feudalism. It was not a war of monarchy or imperialism. This was a war of survival. It was a war for the revolution. It was a war for the people. It was a war for all of France. So France's army wasn't going to be made by around, I don't know, 2% of the population. It was going to be made by everyone. Every man, regardless of age or class, would join the war. Children would go, they would farm. Children would farm. Men of any age, teenagers, they would join the army. Old men would join the army. Middle-aged men would join the army. Everyone would join the army. Hundreds of thousands. More. Millions of people joined the war effort. So now you can understand how these 100,000 armies of Prussia and Austria were no match to the not hundreds, not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of French soldiers. Now, not only that, but women. Women would go into the factories. They would go into the industry. They would fight. And all of this happened. It was super total war. So, yeah, it was pretty tough. It was pretty tough for France here. But hey, this was not a war for the king. It was a war for France itself. The huge armies of France also had huge morale because the French easily crushed the monarchists. So the armies were really happy. They really wanted to fight. The big trouble, though, was back at home. On August 10th, 1792, almost a year after the Constitution, the Jacobins, right, they got really angry because they didn't want any more of this constitutional monarchy thing. And so them and some angry people at Paris formed the Paris Commune, which was like a little club, independent club. Now, the Paris Commune and the people began a huge wave of destruction in France. So people would loot, they would kill each other, they would start huge famines, they would rape everyone. It was terrible. Anyway, sounds really nice. But anyway, to finish things off, the assembly, right, made a referendum to see if the people wanted the king or not, because they didn't want any more of this looting thing. So they asked the people, hey dude, you guys want a king, like Louis XVI? Do you want him to be a king in the constitutional monarchy, or do you just want to get rid of him? Anyway, they made the referendum, right? And most of the people said no. So on the 22nd of September in 1792, the monarchy was finally abolished, right? They said, king, you have no more power. You're like any other citizen. And the assembly was replaced with a brand new type of government called a National Convention. But now things were just crazy. On the 17th of January, 1793, just a few months after they abolished the monarchy, the king was sentenced to death for treason. Hey, you may think, oh, it's just the king, it's the king. Yeah, this was insane at that moment. Like, killing a king is like killing a king. It was terrible. It was like, what are you doing? Are you mentally insane? It was like that. It was insane. So everyone in Europe, everyone in the world, everyone was like, what are they doing? And yeah, on the 21st of January, he was beheaded with a guillotine. Now, this just exploded Europe and everything in France. It was like, that was the last straw. Because of this, Britain, Holland, most of Italy, Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal all declared war on France, and everything just started to go downhill from there. France began a thing called total war, a state of total war. Anyway, the state of total war meant that everything had to be involved with the war. The economy was terrible, and now it was even worse because of all the killing and the Paris Commune. The only thing that kept the economy alive was fighting in the wars and stealing and destroying things from the conquered lands. Anyway, the only thing that actually was going for France right now was its army. They defeated Prussia and Austria in one of the wars, and now they were in a second war against them. Belgium was taken, Holland, Switzerland, and Italy were forced to become revolutionary republics like France, And back at home, so the Jacobins, that had once been part of the Commune, dissolved the Commune. They stopped it because, the king was dead now. They're like, oh yeah. But it didn't end there. There was a really dumb person called Maximilien Robespierre, right? Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilian, right? He was just chilling. He was a Jacobin. He had been part of the Commune. But now that the Commune wasn't real, he made a new thing. It's called the Committee. So just think, the Commune turned into the Committee. Anyway, the Committee, it was led by him. And basically, the Committee had more power than the actual government. So they could do anything they wanted. And Maximilian was really stupid. So France was now being led by a really stupid guy. That's terrible. Maximilian killed everyone. Literally, he would behead everyone. He killed monarchists, rivals, people from the right. He killed Girondins. He killed enemies of the Republic. Anyone who opposed him would be killed by Maximilian. And yeah, so this began the Reign of Terror. Like, people in France called this Reign of Terror for pretty obvious reasons. For the next 2 years, France remained the same. Wars left and right for the survival of the country, a leader who killed everyone, a war-torn nation, and a state of total war. The only things that changed were when 3 brave men in the committee told Maximilien Robespierre that he sucks. And although Maximilian was about to kill them, they were quicker, and they beheaded him first. So on the 22nd of August, 1795, a few years after, it's been a long time since all this, the Assembly finally took control of the government again because the committee was done, and they declared the Directory. And now the Directory is official, alrighty? It's official. The Directory would continue to lead France through war, destruction, and instability. And the Directory didn't really do much. They just led France to a lot more war. Now, it's pretty important to say that France had been making some pretty big differences in Europe. They changed Netherlands, like most of the revolutionary ideas of Netherlands are based on that. They changed Switzerland from a kingdom to another nation, and they started invading Italy. And in Italy, they made a lot of changes. Now, France's army was huge, and they were winning wars against all of Europe, which was pretty amazing. But the country was just dead. It was completely destroyed, and there was a lot of looting and raping and killing inside of France itself. Well, as everything happened, everything that I've told you happened, there was a young man. Now, a young Frenchman. This young Frenchman was born in Corsica, and he had been leading armies in France since the beginning of the revolution. Then he led armies in the Alps in Switzerland. He also led armies in Italy. Then he led armies in the Nile, and also in France. And he became loved by every man of France. He became an idol. Soon enough, he was promoted to the highest command. Now, this man, you probably know him, was called Napoleon. Napoleon and a couple of friends saw how unstable the nation was. And because they were so popular and the army was so loyal to them, they saw an opportunity to gain control. On the 9th of November of 1799, 10 years after the revolution, they took control of the government in a coup. He dealt with his 2 other friends, and the Republic finally ended when he crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804, 18th of May, and began the Napoleonic Wars. So, Napoleon ended the revolution, but started a new one. Well, this is just a lot of information, and it is a lot. There's a lot of other things that happened, but the message I really want to spread is that the French Revolution changed everything, okay? It changed everything. It was a movement that, in the end, brought an even more absolutist man to the front. It brought Napoleon to the front, and I mean, although Napoleon was like, yeah, guys, I'm pro-revolution, guys, he was still pretty dictatorish, Anyway, but the ideas of the revolution were there to stay. Every single modern Western government has been based on the revolution systems. Every single I'd say most societies in the world were changed because of this development. The idea of individualism, of a person, of the economy, of politics being based on a person and not on the king. The idea of liberalism, of you being able to do whatever you want, of capitalism, of being able to buy whatever you want, were all because of this. And also republicanism, the idea of republics and congresses and all of this, although they had started in many other things, really got that kick in the revolution. You know what I mean? The power of the church and the kings was removed from the West after the revolution, and even basic communist ideas and principles and many left-wing theories were started by the Jacobins. So this French Revolution, more than the specifics, was something that wherever it was crushed or not by the Austrians, or wherever it succeeded in conquering the world, it stayed forever. I'm going to quote British Jacobin, which was a Jacobin from England, called Thomas Paine, and he said, "You can't kill an idea." And this idea has been the most revolutionary idea of all time.